Hey everyone, welcome to Reddit Readout. Today we are checking out People of Reddit. Story 1. Methany and the Skunk. I have some interesting neighbors. Let's call them Methany, 50SIHF, and BJ, 60ISHM. They rent the property that creates an L shape next to and behind my property. At first we were cool. Methany would talk to me over my chain link fence about her self-made drama with her BF, BJ's eldest daughter. We had a falling out BC one day when we're in the peak of COVID and WTF is this? Hubs 2.0, the upgrade is watching co-workers die from the complications of the disease. Methany, after telling me of drama, decides to sign off of our little chat with, oh by the way I tested positive for COVID. So that went down like a nuke. I cut off all ties and had an 8 feet wooden privacy fence built. Methany was so mad she came to my door and pounded on it. I had to call the cops. But this is FL and she wasn't on the property so they didn't trespass her. Not even with our CCTV footage. I live in a ghetto. Now there's other shit these clowns did to make me not like them, but you're here for a damn skunk. Methany and BJ have an interesting solution to needing an alarm system. BC they're wackadoos who think the government is out to get them. They refuse to pay for a monitoring system, but they're concerned about the company they keep will steal or otherwise wish them harm. To solve this they got 4 yappy little dogs. These little shits bark at anyone or thing that passes by the front gate. BJ ran one over a few years ago. It was dark, Methany wasn't minding them and the dog was sleeping under a warm van. Sad face. I have a pit bull, Buddy. He's the worst guard dog on the planet as everyone is friend-shaped, but he had one issue, which I have now trained out of him. He's so fucking smart, fence aggression. So as the yappy dog collection grew, Buddy got more aggressive. Again he's over it now and ignores them. But Buddy would go out with my little kids and they weren't very good at getting Buddy to listen. I'd be going out multiple times in the evening calling or physically removing Buddy from the back fence. Now ask me, was Methany and CO pulling their yappy dogs away from the fence? No. No, the residents that I could see through the brush and the fence would stand, arms crossed, and watch me deal with my dog but wouldn't call or pull their dogs away. I'm a suspicious person. I think they're trying to make an incident with the dogs in order to sue me or otherwise get back at me. I dunno, but I smelled a skunk. LOL. So I was done chasing my dog away from one section of fence not blocked by my privacy fence. I figured if I put down something really nasty smelling, neither Buddy nor the yappers would want to come and fight. I was right, and so very wrong. The skunk essence really did the trick. Buddy avoided the place like the plague after he bounded into the skunked up area once. Now the oil all over his paws on the kids just let him inside. Now it's on the carpet. I had to deodorize the house and the skunk smell would waft into the house from the back door for a week or so. Buddy stopped his behavior, the yappers didn't. They didn't give a crap about the smell and would still run to the skunky fence if they heard us come outside. I was saddened that it stopped after 2 days. Methany and BJ figured out where the smell was coming from and would grab the dogs away from the fence. So I enjoy thinking about what Methany and BJ had to endure if it was half as bad as the smell Buddy had on him times 4 little dogs that got up on their beds, couch LOL, carpet everywhere. Gleefully. Story 2. My mom asked for water after yelling at me. I was a small kid in elementary school when my mom yelled at me for hours for a reason I can't remember. Sometime after she stopped yelling, but was still clearly angry, she barked at me to get her a glass of water. It was near the end of the day, I hadn't brushed my teeth yet so my breath definitely did not smell good. When she went to another room, I licked the entire rim of the glass, inside and out, then filled it with water and gave it to her. She took a sip and was immediately disgusted by how awful it tasted. She saw that the rim of the glass was dirty and asked where I got the glass. I played innocent and said I got it from the cabinet, and she chalked it up to my dad not cleaning the glass enough. She still has no idea I did it, as far as I know. Story 3. Be a dick about street parking. Ooh, what's that crunching sound when you pull out of the driveway? Short 1. and I admit to its very petty nature. TLDR at the bottom. My neighbor thinks the curb in front of his house is his, and none shall park there. Now, I sort of feel the same way in that it's a minor annoyance if someone's blocking the view out my front window. But the key word is minor. It's a residential street. Sometimes people have friends over, and unless the car's up on blocks it's a safe bet that it will eventually leave. This guy, though. He goes a little ballistic. If my driveway fills up and someone parks in front of his house, he's up at my doorbell in half a second. Yelling at people to park somewhere else. Get off of his curb. The usual. I've even cautioned friends to skip his stretch of street and park in front of other places. So there came a day when he had to park on the street because his driveway was being resurfaced. Naturally, he took that as an opportunity to park in front of my house, presumably to teach me a lesson. I took that as an opportunity to give him a taste of his own medicine, playing a reverse Uno card on his reverse Uno card, so to speak. We have all these little snails living on the rocks and seaweed by the ocean, periwinkles, in case anyone is wondering. When they die, which seems to be their primary occupation, they leave behind these pretty multicolored shells between a nickel and quarter in size. At one point, I had gathered a couple of buckets of the dead ones, with the idea of using them in place of landscaping rocks. Turned out to not be the cool and quirky look I had imagined, just so you know. Thankfully I never fully committed, and so the brightly spiraled shells just sat in my backyard for a couple of years. Cue the revenge. In the dead of night, I made little piles of snail shells on either side of each of his passenger side, the side right next to the curb, tires. And then I set my alarm so I could watch him leave for work the next morning. I was 50-50ths on whether he'd see the snails, but I figured nothing ventured nothing gained. And so it was with great satisfaction that I sat on my porch swing, sipping coffee, and watched him pull forward, hear the loud crunch of snail shells crushing, get out to look at the piles of fractured shells, and then look around in confusion. That's when he got to see me waving at him. The middle finger he gave me as he drove off was the icing on my morning's cake. TLDR, piled a bunch of snail shells under my neighbor's tires so that the noise they made when he drove over them would surprise him. Small note, as I know someone will ask/comment, no, periwinkle shells won't puncture a tire. Or at least they've never punctured any of mine, and didn't puncture his as he drove over double handfuls of them. Story 4. Job interviewer ghosted me and then had one of his employees tell me to go home, so I did. While I do have a job already, I thought it would be worthwhile to see what else is out there. A week ago, I found a job posting on Indeed. It sounded like a good gig, paid good, and is work that I like doing. The only downfall is that it's a 35-minute drive out of town. I had a good conversation with the business owner, via Indeed inbox, and he seemed like a good guy. I explained that I work every day from 7 a.m. to 3:10 p.m. and he understood that there is a bit of a commute to his shop. He asked me if I could meet up with him at 3:30. I told him that it isn't possible as I was done at 3:10 and can't do a 35-minute drive in under 20 minutes. I explained that I would be leaving town at 3:10 to come and see him, and that I would see him when I get there, somewhere around 3:40-ish, so I gave him with my phone number just in case something was to change, and we left on a good note. I drove rather fast, getting there at 3:37, happy that I got there in under 35 minutes. I show up. Business closed. I figured he was somewhere nearby, so I get out of my vehicle to search. I look over to my left to see two teenagers moving some materials. I approach them and ask them where their boss was while explaining that I had a meeting with him now. One of them then informs me that he just left a few minutes ago, but could call him back to come meet me. He calls his boss, saying who I am, etc. The teenager chuckles, says okay with a "you gotta be fucking kidding me" look on his face and then hangs up. Teenager to me, he says to go home. I asked him to repeat himself. He said go home, this time laughing uncomfortably. I now have another 35 men drive ahead of Maine and I am very irritated. I decided to leave as his boss instructed. But instead of driving the gravel driveway back onto the highway, the way I came in from, I decided to leave him a present to remember me by, some donut tire skid marks on his front lawn as I tore out of there. 30 minutes after that, he felt the need to reach out to me and introduce himself via private number, but I let it go to voicemail, as I was driving, which upon listening to later on, further proved to me that all his negative Google reviews were more than likely all true, and that this person isn't someone to do business with anyways. TLDR job interviewer ghosted me after I drove 35 minutes to see/35 minutes back home, was then rude to me, so I did a donut on their front lawn. Story 5. Caused my bully to miss out on his dream job, twice. The last year of high school, I was bullied relentlessly by two guys at my boarding school, with the high point being, them getting me expelled from boarding school. I got back at one of them in the best way possible. A few details beforehand. I was thrown out of my previous boarding school for dealing pot, that's another petty revenge story to be honest, so at my new one, while I was still doing copious amounts of pot, I was no longer dealing, which annoyed these guys, let's call them Tony and Clint, to no end as they knew that I was paying less than half of what they were paying. My father is a well-known carpenter in our area but our surname is quite common, close to something like Smith in the English world in sense of how common that name is. The boarding school was quite a distance from my hometown, in relative terms, so the link between me and my dad's company was not clear at all. So, this was a government-run boarding school with huge funding issues, as a result the last 2 years of high school, so when you're 16 to 18 years old, we're just a few people, 7 at our highest number, and they just let us do whatever we wanted on a separate floor as long as we didn't make too much noise etc. So the first year, before Clint and Tony joined us on our floor, were absolutely amazing. I was dragging my PlayStation 1 back and forth each week and most of us had a PC on our room, we even had a network hidden above the hanging ceiling. So, life was amazing, we smoked lots of pot on our balcony, played loads of games and generally had an brilliant time. Then the second year, Clint and Tony join us from the younger group and we lose 2 people that graduated. So, while I wasn't dealing, I was sharing my pot with one of the guys at boarding school that was at the time my best friend. Tony and Clint were jealous of this too. So they started a campaign of harassment and bullying. For 3 months they made my life hell, banging on my door at random times of the night, pouring water in my bed, throwing dustbins into the shower stall I was using, anything and everything to mess with me, even calling on their friends to threaten me on the way to school. The actual school I was attending was a few miles from the boarding school itself. So, when I had finally had enough and was left with either violence of going to the principal, I picked the wrong option and went to the principal's office. 2 weeks later, I was called into the principal's office again only to be told Tony and Clint said I was dealing pot at the boarding school and with my history the principal of course believed them instantly and gave me 2 weeks time to find a solution before throwing me out of boarding school. Since it's incredibly hard to prove you are not doing something, there was not a lot I could do, honestly even my parents were probably doubting the dealing part, can't really blame them with my history, but still. So in the last week at boarding school, I took my dad's old Land Cruiser, from 1978, while this was in 1998, to load all my stuff in it for the way home. Then as a final act of bullying, Clint and Tony threw a few glass water bottles at it, one of them making quite a dent in the hood. However, when I wanted to call the cops on them, the principal said that if I would get the cops involved, he would report to them about my dealing, which would be hard to deny as I did still have pot in my room as I always had it with me. So, I leave boarding school and finish the rest of my final year of high school by taking the train back and forth to that school. It's a 1h 15-min train ride, plus 30 minutes to the station from my house and 15 minutes from the station to the school, so every day I'm losing 3 to 4h thanks to these 2 a-holes. But anyway, I graduate high school, start college in another faraway city and kind of try to ban those 2 a-holes from my mind. About a year later, I suddenly see Tony on our driveway. We live in a house next to my dad's carpentry company, and I see him walking up to the office. As he was studying woodworking when we were in boarding school and my dad is almost famous in those circles for his work, it was clear that he really wanted this job. So I called my dad on his cell phone, no WhatsApp yet, and asked him to quickly come inside the house. My dad comes in. I explain him that this Tony is that Tony that made my life living hell and caused all the shit with the boarding school and the dent in his Land Cruiser. My dad doesn't really react too much about it, but I can see him thinking what to do with this information. So, he goes into his office, has an interview with Tony, for 3 hours. Then he gives me a quick call just saying, "Can you go sit outside on the bench and say hi to Tony on his way out please?" So I rush out, go sit on the bench with a book and out comes Tony, looking like $1,000,000, super happy about the amazing interview he just had at his dream job. Until he see me, I wave, smile and with my biggest grin say, "Hello Tony, how was the interview?" And I could just see his face deflate. Apparently my dad had been super enthusiastic about his job application for the whole time, asking extra questions and generally behaving like he had just found the perfect guy to start working for him, absolutely convincing Tony that he had just scored his dream job. Seems Tony even said it a couple of times how badly he wanted to work for my father as he had seen some of the things my dad built and he was in awe of them. And at the end my dad ended with the usual "we'll be in touch." But in a way that made sure Tony was convinced he had it in the bag, then had to take a quick call in his office, to notify me, and then sent Tony on his way with a nice spring in his step. So that was the first time. A lot happened after that and due to personal circumstances, my dad decided to early retire and sells his company to someone else, but he stays on as a consultant. As my dad's company is quite well known, Tony must have heard about the change of leadership so he tries again. This is about 4 years later by that time. My dad hears about him coming to apply and basically gets the guy to do the same to Tony as he did 4 years before. So the new boss has an amazing interview with Tony except instead of me being out there when he leaves, it's my dad who comes to join the final part of the interview, again cementing for Tony that he'll never ever have a job in that company. And that was my petty revenge, twice on one of the biggest bullies in my life. I still feel warm and fuzzy when I think of his face, laughing face. That's all for today. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.